Woman telling her story, come on, from the heart of the mystery, dispelling years of violence. We are breaking the silence.
Welcome to another episode of the Cocoon Podcast. Hello, I'm Ruby Michaelides from the Blue Butterfly Institute, and I am your host for today. On this podcast, we dive into meaningful conversations with incredible people who bring fresh insights and expertise. Let's get right into today's discussion with our guest.
Let your voices be heard.
Hi, Kendra. How are you?
I'm good, Ruby. How are you?
I'm doing great. So you're all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome to the Cocoon.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here and be able to share from Charlotte, North Carolina. It's so great.
So can I just ask that you introduce yourself, please, and what do you do?
Yes. So, everyone in the audience, my name is Kendra King, and I am a mental health therapist who specializes in sex and porn addiction, affair recovery, and sex therapy.
Beautiful. So what made you interested in specifically specifying in pornography and sex addiction?
So I always prided myself or acquired the passion to be an eclectic therapist, and I wanted to connect with topics that I felt personally and professionally connected to, and being able to learn outside of the scope of the traditional therapist. And it's one thing to engage in mental health and substance abuse therapy, but it's another to specialize in topics that really aren't talked about as much, specifically more intimate concerns and issues that people have that relate to interactions with one another in relationships and just the dynamic of how unhealthy sexual behaviors can impact people's ability to engage in healthy connections with one another. So when I got exposed to it, I had recently joined a group private practice. And when I found this practice, I didn't know that this was necessarily a topic or a pursuit in therapy to specialize in. So it was really interesting and really inspiring to really better understand the population and how I could contribute the skill set that I had already acquired to this field, and also be able to learn and grow as well.
Oh, I love that. I think that's such a beautiful answer to the question. So I guess one of the more open-ended, I guess a really obvious question, but just for our listeners, what is porn and sex addiction? What does that look and act like for you?
So how porn and sex addiction typically shows up is engaging in unhealthy compulsive sexual behaviors that are for the most part hidden within relationships. It can manifest itself as something that one has engaged in over a period of time where they were exposed to sexuality at an early age, or they have engaged in these behaviors as a coping skill due to the lack of healthier coping skills to be able to release stress, release anxiety, just be able to address um, triggers from just daily life functioning and interaction.
And yeah, I think that's a really, really great succinct way to describe it because also porn and sex addiction, the study is quite new basically since maybe last century. It's not a very old type of niche therapy, right?
Right, right. This is very true. There are contributors within the field that have brought awareness within, I would say, the past 10 to maybe 20, 25 years, but it's still, like you said, a niche that hasn't been explored to the degree of other, issues or other topics that come up within society, right? When you think about sex, it's such a taboo topic for us as people to even just talk about in general, it from a healthy perspective. So when you start engaging in dialogue around unhealthy sexual behaviors. It's kind of this thing of let's not address that, let's kind of keep that swept under the rug, as opposed to exposing light to it and being able to better understand how does this manifest? How does what are patterns? What are behaviors? How do you seek guidance and support, treatment, whatever the case may be? And specifically when it shows up in relationships and in coupleships, it really it gets even deeper when it comes to how to help healing be influenced and how to guide the couples and the partners through this sense of betrayal trauma.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that really succinct, cohesive response, particularly moving on to specifically talking about porn addiction. The rate of people getting addicted to porn is growing younger and younger, right? So in Australia, I was reading an article about how the average age that men specifically start getting into pornography is 10 years old. That's so young, right? That's like that child age, right?
And
So, do you think that starting, particularly with porn addiction, starting that at such a young age does have that mental and emotional, developmental effect whilst they're still going through puberty?
of course, because when you're talking about the age of 10, we're talking about pre-adolescence, preteen. Well, they're starting to be engaged with peer relationships more. So whether, excuse me, they were exposed by their friends, whether they found these things in the home, it puts such an impression on the development of the brain, and being able to give yourself a healthy dose of dopamine as opposed to exposing it to something unhealthy and trying to seek that instant gratification um throughout whatever experiences that you may have continuing through the lifespan.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, and also just to reiterate, like sex and porn addiction covers all genders, right? It's not just a male problem, it's both
Yes,
female, male, female, non binary. It covers all types of genders, right?
it does. It definitely does because it just the way it manifests or the way it shows up in behaviors can be different across genders, across orientations, and being able to understand that this impacts just the level of humanity in general is really big because there's sometimes we get caught up in the idea or this is just a male issue or women don't have this problem or the non-binary don't struggle in these areas or whatever the case may be, however you associate or identify yourself. We all are sexual beings. So it can impact us all just in different ways.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's that idea of that we are all sexual beings. I love that because you're right. Like, I think a lot of people don't understand that this is just not a gender thing. It's actually a society issue as well as to why porn and sex addiction is such a big thing right now. But what are the differences that you've noticed between men or masculine people that have porn and sex addiction versus women or feminine people?
So with the masculine, it's more of the perception, the look of things, being able to be physically stimulated, the physical attraction is more so comes from the masculine perspective. The feminine perspective is more so of that arousal, that stimulation, that fantasy, that being wooed, being pursued. So it's very different. It's very subtle from the feminine perspective, and then with the masculine perspective, it's just cut and dry in your face. When it comes to how those different energies engage.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that with men and masculine, it's more of a physical stimulation, whereas for women and feminine, it's more emotional and mental and like you said, that intellectual stimulation.
Yes, yes, it is. That is correct, Ruby. And with the more of the feminine energy, like I said, it is more subtle. So you won't hear a lot about women engaging in or being considered porn or sex addicts because of the nature of how it shows up. But they do exist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, even though it's lower, it's not that much lower than men. Like the rate, it's actually quite balanced, which I was quite
Mhm.
surprised at, that you would expect, I guess, for women, and I guess this is the stigma, right? That the rates would be so much lower than men, but it's actually not really. They're quite almost even.
Right, right. Because when you think about it from a woman's perspective or from a feminine perspective, it's that emotional stimulation. It's that mental stimulation. So whatever you're not,
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
it's that mental stimulation. So whatever you're not acquiring connection wise from your partner, it's being able to seek that out somewhere. And whether it be in porn, whether it be pursuing someone else, whether it be sexual, it's there. It's just not, like I said, as in your face as the masculine energy's engagement is.
Yeah, and also I think definitely the genre of what both are seeking, particularly with porn as well, is quite different. Definitely with the way that women are more subtle, they tend to kind of look at, I guess, more emotional type of porn.
Yeah.
Whereas with men, it's most. I was actually reading the statistics about it the other day. They tend to view more, I guess, for lack of a better term, rough or rating or objectifying type of porn. Whereas the women, it's more about interpersonal relationship, for lack of a better term, I guess, boyfriend experience.
Yes, yes. When you think about, so you have the soft porn or you have the erotica, right? The novels that have passion and pursuit and just this sexual arousal of embracing and for like it's very sensual. What the feminine energy or what women engage in is the more of the sensual arousal in comparison to the masculine or the men being engaged into the more that raw, that performative type of porn use. So yes, you are correct, really. You're doing good on your research, girl.
Thank you, Kendra. You're so supportive. Of course, I got to do my research before I come on here, right? I can't be on here blind. But also, I think this is just such a topic that is growing right now, and I think in the future we'll see more of its impact for the young generation, the teenagers, in that, right?
Yes, this is very true. This is very true. And that's like the biggest concern for me too is being able to teach a healthy sexuality to the younger generation and what that looks like and what that encompasses because it's not just the physiological aspects of sexuality, right? It's the development, how your emotions get involved, how you can potentially get taken advantage of the aspects of your health that gets impacted. There's just so much that that if the earlier they engage in it from an unhealthy perspective, the more issues as they continue to mature and become young adults and then fully functioning adults to where this is going to show up in the relationships. This impacts their level of attachment within intimate relationships. So there's some deep stuff that this these sexual behaviors can impact moving forward as you continue to grow and mature.
Exactly. I think that's the perfect segue for our next question. How does porn and sex addiction affect emotional and physical intimacy between partners?
Okay, good question, Ruby. So, when it comes to the impact of being able to engage in relationships, right? Porn gives you this false sense of knowing what it is to engage in your relationship from emotional and sexual aspect, right? There's this false sense of, oh, you know how to engage sexually with your partner. From the masculine energy, from the male perspective, it's just like, oh, my partner is this sexual being. There's this sense of objectifying, this performative perspective. And then from the feminine side or from the woman's perspective, it's just like, oh, he's gonna stimulate my mind. He understands my emotions. He's just gonna be able to rescue me and make me feel so good. And that is not the reality of the situation, because we're talking about two individuals who come from differing perspectives and differing upbringings. And based off of whatever they were taught, they're bringing that to the relationship. And then if you throw in sex addiction or porn use, or just the lack of understanding healthy sexuality or engaging in porn from a perspective of not over consuming, there's so much that can be impacted. So there's a surface level of more of a physical attachment or connection, as opposed to more deeper and meaningful connection with one another.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's very important, yeah, to understand that. I guess with women or masculine as well, there's that foreplay, right? And that's actually a really big stimulation. As you said, we are sensual people. It's not just the physical, it's that emotional attachment that leads. Whereas I get with people who have that porn addiction, right? In most porn, it's so performative. There's no foreplay. They just lead into it, the act, right? And so do you think that like that also heavily affects, I guess, how people view physical intimacy as well?
I do. I do, because there's this sense of like, oh, we're just going to get straight to penetration and that's it. Well, women aren't set up like that. Like there's so many things. My sex therapy supervisor, she has these chart pictures of what it looks like for women's arousal in comparison to what it looks like for men's arousal. So men's arousal is just like the little switch that you just like turn, right? Or you just pull down. The women's arousal description has like knobs and buttons, and it just has all this stuff on it. And it's just, in reality, that is how we're wired. We have to make sure the environment is okay. Like, have I gotten everything done on my checklist? Do I feel connected? Do I feel open? Do I feel vulnerable? Like, we have so many things that we have to make sure is in order. In comparison to men, they're just like, okay, let's do this. And so there's a disconnect at times when you do throw porn use in there, and there's just this assumption that we just get straight to it, and there is no sense of stimulation, no connection, no arousal, foreplay you mentioned, which is a big thing that's lacking in the sexual relationships um that I've encountered. It's just there's a misunderstanding, but there's also a lack of communication too, Ruby. Like, the couples are getting together and not talking about their experiences sexually, because there's a sense of shame and guilt around it, or you don't want your partner to make these judgments or assume things. And it's just like, well, we're going to have issues in our sexual interaction if we don't talk about this stuff. What are boundaries that we have around porn use? Are we okay with it? Are we not? Like, what exactly are our expectations? And that, a lot of the times, is the biggest barrier, because there's a lack of understanding or communication around sex within that relationship.
Yeah, I love that, Kendra. I think that's such a beautiful response. And I think that'll definitely get our listeners thinking, because you're right. It's such an important thing to discuss that people don't. Because you're right. I think there's shame. I think also that, there's a lot of stigma around being vanilla nowadays, whatever that means. And you're right. Like there is this prevention, I guess, or this social stigma around, particularly, I think, as women, not feeling like it's cool or trending or okay to have these conversations with your partner, particularly earlier on in their relationship. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think that's great, Ruby. I love the fact that you bring up vanilla, because I've had couples mention that. And I'm like, can you define that for me? Like, what does vanilla look like in your relationship with one another? And then they'll talk about either it's been the same positions every time, or there's a lack of excitement, or they know what's coming. And it's just like, okay, that makes sense. And then also, being able to feel comfortable with talking about sex. And like I said before, it stems from childhood. If there is not an environment that you were raised in where there was conversation around sexuality and the development of your sexuality, or what to do when you're engaged in sexual relationships, you kind of left to just kind of figure it out on your own. And then that's where your peer influence comes from. Or if you come from a culture where you were raised religious, it's just like you don't engage in that until you get married. But then when you get married, like you don't know what you're doing. So then you feel a sense of inferiority, or that you don't know what you're doing, or that you can't satisfy your partner. So there's just so many things that can impact your ability to be comfortable with talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and I love that you bring up those themes because to me it shows that it's quite universal. Because have you noticed that there is like universal themes with man female couples as well as same sex couples too? Do you notice like the similarities are brought up regardless of what the gender is?
Yes, the patterns are beautiful that I see. And I'm just like, I don't know why people are in constant comparison when it comes to relationships. It's like, I see the same things. It doesn't matter if I'm seeing a same sex couple or an opposite gender couple, it's all the same. So that's why I feel as though sexuality is so beautiful, because we all experience it. We have different perspectives, but we all experience it the same way in regards to our upbringing, feeling comfortable with talking about it, assuming that we know these things or we know how to satisfy our partners.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Assuming that we know these things or we know how to satisfy our partners when we really actually don't, because we just learned this stuff and just thought that we could just do a one size fits all, and that's not how it works. So really being able to better understand not only your partner but the person, but just the humanness of who you're with. That is definitely important, because we all are individuals and we're made up differently.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love that you bring up the humanity regarding around the issue of porn and sex addiction because you're right. Like I think in a way we tend to dehumanize these people in a way by just making them, I guess, victims or perpetrators of their own volition. They can't control themselves. So, in your opinion, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about porn and sex addiction and its effect on relationships?
Okay. One of the biggest misconceptions is sex and porn addiction automatically goes to pedophilia. That is not the case at all. I want the audience to understand, if you know of or have experienced or been in a relationship with a sex and porn addict, do not automatically assume it's with underage individuals. That is not necessarily the case. Number two, please know that it started way before you got with this person. Way before. There is a root there that in order you follow the trail, and not to justify their actions or justify and excuse their behaviors. It's not about that. But you have to broaden your perspective to figure out, how did this person get to this? What led them to get to this point to where it's a compulsive thing, right? They have to engage in it. Also, another big one is the internalization of individuals engaging in these unhealthy sexual behaviors or compulsive sexual behaviors. That is something that you did wrong. It ain't got nothing to do with you. It doesn't matter if you've been able to satisfy them sexually or meet all their needs. It's it's something embedded within them that they have to be able to address. Yes, you may have influenced some areas, something, but at the end of the day, it's really within that person. That is where the struggle is within that person.
And I think, yeah, you're right. Like that response is, and I think that's a really great way to speak to partners in that and the people who are listening, in that it is not their fault that, and they probably, you probably can't have done anything to prevent it in the first place with how ingrained it is. And like I said, with these people watching porn at such a young age, like at 10 years old, obviously it's getting ingrained in them in such a young age for development, right?
Yes, yes. We're talking about learned behavior. We're talking about observational learning. There's just so much. And because you got to think about it, you're 10 years old. Your brain is feel like it's always going to be a sponge, but at that point, it's vulnerably, consistently always a sponge and soaking in information and processing things, and hormones are happening and neurons are firing. Like, it's shaping your behaviors that potentially will lead through your development years. So that having someone who was exposed to these types of things, especially depending on the type of porn that they were exposed to at that age, that could be very detrimental. Very detrimental.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think one of my recent episode podcasts was with another like sex therapist who spoke about how choking has become such a popular trend now. These teenagers, younger and younger, are starting to believe that choking is basically an essential in relationships, yet they don't really know the effects or the consequences of participating in asphyxiation play if it's done incorrectly. Do you think that the impact of porn is having an effect on teenagers who, I guess, are more compelled to enjoying, for lack of a better term, I guess, more rough or high risk behavior?
Because you gotta think about it. Teenagers, they're already engaging in high risk behaviors, but when you start incorporating things like that, not only is that a physical harm, but it's an emotional thing. Like, you're shaping what they are gonna eventually engage in as they, like I said before, get older and engage in more mature relationships where they're taking these immature or these unhealthy behaviors into these relationships, and it's just like, no, no. And the fact that this particular age group is just set up for all types of behavioral issues, mental health struggles, physical impairments. Like, it's just so bad for that age group right now because they're already struggling with social issues, social anxieties. Like, they can't even talk to somebody face to face. It's got to be a text or through social media. It's just like, so there's already a disconnect and already an impairment or impediment on attachment, just in the barest, the bare minimum form foundation. Then you add levels like this, it's just like, what are we really setting up our children to be like? And we really got to take a hard look at how do we want this to continue by us continuing to ignore or be in denial that this is happening? Or are we going to have the courage to shift the narrative and really be able to teach them a sense of unhealthy engagement versus healthy engagement? And it does force us to look at ourselves and what we've experienced and how we were raised and taught about sexuality.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, Kendra. And I really felt drawn to what you mentioned about attachment because when I was doing research on it before our podcast, there were three notable points regarding the intertwining of porn and sex addiction. And that is, most people who practice it have an avoidant attachment style. And then two things as well is that a lot of it they view as a type of self sabotage or a type of self harm in a way. What's your opinion about that?
So I definitely would agree with the avoidant attachment style because there's something happened to where they didn't have a secure attachment style, whether it was impacted with their parents or other familial members, or just relationally as they gone through that aspect of life. There is this disconnect and this idea of, if there is not a healthy attachment or secure attachment formed, then there will be some avoidant behaviors because the sense or the comfortability around being vulnerable with someone is non existent. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to communicate my emotions in an effective way. I don't know how to cope with stress. It's not safe for me to talk about my feelings. So I withdraw and I engage in behaviors that may be considered unhealthy, to be able to deal with just the things that I have within.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that's very accurate regarding the point about you mentioned with avoidant and having that lack of communication or that feeling of safety, right? So, in regards to it being a type of self sabotage or a type of self harm, do you reckon that this type of sex and porn addiction can be self harming or can be a type of, I guess, harmful technique to the people who practice it?
Well, when you think about it, if you think about it from a different perspective, because self-harm can be perceived as engaging in cutting or engaging in like you talk about choking or anything that does physical hurt to yourself. However, if we're relating it to porn use and we're talking about masturbation while we're engaging in porn use, that could potentially affect your ability to have healthy healthy erectile behaviors, or it could lead to erectile dysfunction, because of the fact that you're overstimulating yourself. So that is a sense of unconscious self-sabotage. Self-harm can, this light and perspective, can be perceived of you're keeping yourself from attaching in a healthy way to other people. You don't want to engage in a healthy sexual way with someone else as opposed to with a screen. So there can be forms of how you look at in sex and porn addiction or porn use as ways of self-harm and self-sabotage, just depending on the scope of how you look at it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting response. And it definitely has got me thinking because you're right. Like, I think when I, again, do my research, there is so much documentation. I mean, I guess with men, I have seen a little bit with women too about how they say the impacts of it physically, the fact that they struggle to be intimate with their partner physically, even, I guess, becoming physically aroused, right? Like,
Yeah.
there are, like, those are the physical and emotional impacts of like excessive porn use, but obviously porn addiction and sex addiction are different. So what are the emotional and I guess physical impacts of sex addiction with people?
So in partners, when you think about sex addiction,
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Sex addiction with people.
so in partners, when you think about sex addiction, it's just like you're not. It's just it's empty. It's empty and meaningless connection because you're just jumping from one person to another. You're not allowing yourself to get rooted, to be seen, to be heard, to have a sense of emotional safety and security with someone. And that is detrimental because we were created for connection. So how are you going to be able to connect and you're just going from one person to another? And then we talk, it could lead to health issues, right? So there's so much there when it comes to, engaging in sex addiction, and emotionally, it just keeps you so trapped and closed off. A sense of loneliness and emptiness sets in, and you're just constantly just running from yourself. Instead of dealing with whatever it is that's bothering you internally, you're just trying to get that instant gratification, that dopamine fix, that dopamine hit right quick so you feel good for a moment, but you forget that you eventually got to come back down.
Yeah,
Who do you have around you to be able to like really support you through with trying to navigate that?
yes, and that's such an interesting response too. That dopamine hit, that thought has been ingrained in my mind because there is, I guess, a lot of stigma or a lot of controversy about whether porn use and sex is an addiction in itself. So, what do you think makes excessive porn use or having excessive sexual partners or attempts an addiction?
Right. So the level of engagement, right? Say you're in a relationship with someone and you're engaging in porn use, right? And your partner doesn't know. So there's a sense of secrecy. So that is negatively impactful on the relationship. Or you being able to feel comfortable with sharing with that person what is it that you're engaging in, how often and stuff like that. So that's one way. Then another way is when it comes to sex, excuse me, and being able to being able to, like I said before, emotionally connect, and it being something that you're overly engaging and you're constantly trying to soothe yourself through sex. And it's just like, well, when are we gonna emotionally connect? Are you okay with just being able to relax with me as your partner and not have to be physically intimate? Like there's something within that is constantly in a state of distress or stirring about, where you feel like the only way to soothe that is to act out in a sexual manner. So it's all about the level of engagement and being able to be honest and figure out, like, where is this coming from? It's okay to be aroused and want to engage in sexual activities or engage in porn. We're incorporating that in our relationship, but it's talked about, it's discussed, we have boundaries around it, and it's okay for us to be able to engage with one another in sex. But when it comes to the point where if this is a constant thing all the time, that's when it's questionable and concerning.
I'm starting to understand. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, because I just wanted to reiterate as well to our listeners that having a high sexual libido is not the same as having a sex addiction, which I think is also a stigma as well, that people who have a really, really high libido or just enjoy sex as well is not the same as being a sex addict.
No, there's definitely a difference. And I want to encourage the listeners too. It's okay to have a high sex drive. That's all right. But when it becomes excessive, like you're excessively pursuing this, then it becomes a problem. And being able to have conversations around that, finding comfortability and vulnerability with your partner specifically, so we can navigate what that looks like. Because there is a level of being able to have a sense of balance in that area of your relationship. Balance is definitely important.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that, that effective balance is really important because moving on to our next question. So you mentioned being withdrawn or having an inability to become aroused with your emotional partner. But what are some other signs someone should look out for if they suspect their partner's porn use is crossing into addiction, or if they think that maybe their partner could be a sex addict? As well, I think, excessive cheating is probably the one with the sex addiction. But yeah, so what are the correlations that you see with porn and sex addiction in partners? What are the signs?
Well, the patterns with the porn use is, like I said before, secrecy. Constantly being caught engaging in porn use. And also, there are levels of porn use too. It doesn't necessarily have to be that raw, uncut filter stuff. Being scrolling through social media and looking at explicit or innuendo images, whether it be, not a lot of clothing on the individual or silhouettes being overemphasized and exposed and stuff like that, body parts being exposed. So it could look like really things that could be subtle as well. And so if as a partner, if I'm constantly seeing that you're just constantly scrolling or you're trying to hide your phone or just different things like that on social media, just there's the level of secrecy and it creates a problem within the porn use. Sex addiction, like you said, excessive cheating, constantly being caught in multiple affairs, and the excuse being used, oh, you don't satisfy me sexually, or I can't do these things with you, or, our sex life isn't what it used to be, and so I was looking for something else that was more exciting. Just excuses to shift blame on the partner is pattern behavior as well.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned this idea of like porn and sex addiction not just being, I guess, the typical situation that people think of, just that raw, uncut, filtered porn with porn use, or the excessive like one night stand encounters with sex addiction, because the sex industry, it's such a big field, right? So for me, so I know that there's this really big conception now around OnlyFans. A lot of people are like, well, I'm not a porn addict because I just use OnlyFans. But yet, or the type of, I'm not a sex addict because I go to see, erotic dancers. So therefore it's not cheating, right? So there's a lot more, I guess, that encompasses the sex work industry than just what the stigma situation is usually, right?
Yes, this is very true. It's so broad, Ruby. Like you said, like going to the strip club, or going to see the erotic dancers is something. Social media is something else. OnlyFans is something. You're paying for that stuff. So you're paying to get aroused. And once your arousal is done, then it's just like, okay, well, I want to do it again. So it's a constant, you're constantly trying to feed and chase that feeling, right? And social media is turning into soft porn for the most part, because when you think about it, you can't expose yourself all the way on social media or you get flagged or reported. So there are ways around it to where things are still done subtly. And so it can, yeah, it's very broad. It is not cut and dry anymore. Not cut and dry at all.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really important to bring up as well, that the scope, as you mentioned, is expanding. But I guess moving on to something more positive, there is recovery. It's not permanent, if you or your partner is addicted to porn or sex. So how can partners rebuild trust and connection after they feel that porn or sex addiction has damaged their relationship?
So the first thing is that we have to recognize that there is a problem, that this has impacted our relationship, and being willing to work on it. Because a lot of the times I get couples to where the hurt partner comes to me, but the person that engaged in the act, they're still struggling with being in denial about those behaviors. So until there's a level, of accountability and acceptance of you did, it doesn't matter the level of engagement that you had, there was still betrayal. There was still a sense of hurt. You still violated the relationship. And the willingness to be okay with, there is no time frame with being able to heal through these things. It's a constant journey of recovery every day, as long as you stay in this relationship. But also, if you don't stay, you have to understand that you're still going to have to do the work, because you're going to have this sense, as the betrayed partner, you're going to have this sense, well, all the people that I end up trying to date, we're going to have this type of issue, and you're going to be hyper vigilant on trying to figure out like what's wrong with them, or do they have this issue? And until you heal that, it's going to be a constant battle for you to feel a sense of safety.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
It's going to be a constant battle for you to feel a sense of safety within relationships. So that's more so from the betrayed partner's perspective. Also, with the person who has violated the relationship, you have to understand that that betrayed partner is going to be on a constant roller coaster emotionally when it comes to their healing. They may have been, have expressed, being able to work through it or feel like they're in a better place, and then they get a trigger out of nowhere, and then it's like you start back over at square one. And so there's a sense of understanding that there's a level of PTSD that has set in, and understanding that the only thing you can really do is focus on what you can control. And that is your behaviors, that is your actions, and being able to show your partner that you're willing to work through this, you understand, and that you're committed to doing what is necessary to rebuild that trust.
Oh, yeah, I think that's such a beautiful response, just so succinct and just so easy to understand for our listeners. Just two more questions. What are some recovery techniques that you have used with the couples that you have worked with to help maintain and build those connections to, I guess, move past what has happened?
That is a question that I have never gotten, Ruby, and I'm so glad that you have asked that. Well, so for the betrayed partner, I need you to understand what is happening with your partner and why they've engaged in these behaviors. There's a level of discovery of where this all started that is important for you to understand, if especially if you're going to stay with this person, right? And being able to navigate your willingness to work on when you do get triggered by things. How do you cope with those triggers in a healthy way? Do you lash out? Do you cuss them out? Like, do you act in? Do you internalize? Do you engage in unhealthy behaviors? Like, being able to work on your own individual recovery, identify what you got going on and how that allows you to be able to show up and support your partner in a better way, in a more healthier, positive way. But you have to come from a place of accountability, but also understanding. And the same for the partner who's engaged in these things. You have to take accountability for your actions and accept that this has impacted your partner on a level that you may not be able to understand at times. And you would hope that this goes away. Well, unfortunately, it may not. And there's just levels of growth that you go through. But being focused on your individual journey is probably the biggest recovery effort that I try to offer. Is that individual therapy, that individual work, that is what you focus on, because inevitably that shapes how you heal as a couple. Because if I'm focused on my stuff over here and you're focused on your stuff over there, essentially we're going to be able to show up in the relationship from a different viewpoint, because I'm open to the journey as long as you're open and committed to walking with it with me.
Yes. And that's just such, for me, a very motivating response, because what you've mentioned, this idea of accountability, communication, patience, I guess, for both partners, to me just really reiterates that it's not the be or an end all. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm sure that you've worked with people who have had really beautiful, flourishing relationships and have managed to stay together even after all of this has happened.
Yes, it is honoring to see those being willing to commit to the process and understand that it doesn't necessarily feel good or look good. But as you continue to show up for one another, to advocate for yourself, to be able to engage in essentially a new relationship with this person, because your relationship has now evolved. And now we got to figure out, how are we going to be able to stay connected when all this turmoil and all this darkness has clouded what I thought was, a sense of perfection. And it's just like, no, we just have to evolve. We have to shift, and we have to figure out and identify, where are areas of growth that we need to engage in. And when partners recognize that, and they really don't focus more so on what the action that led them here is, but they really look at how they showed up in the relationship in general, there's so many light bulbs go off and so many aha moments happen, because essentially they're able to see like, oh, I wasn't as engaged in this area. We did stop dating one another. We did check out. It did become routine. We didn't engage in emotional connection. They start really understanding and pinpointing where there were signs and red flags within the relationship. And that right there is something that changes the nature of the recovery journey.
And I love that response. And I think that's just a beautiful pathway to just one of my final questions. What benefits do you get as a therapist from seeing or helping these couples have a recovery period and help themselves and help them understand, the process of what has happened and how to grow from it?
So it's a personal and a professional sense of fulfillment, because professionally being able to help individuals work through what they feel as though is essentially a death, right? They're having to die and be reborn to something that they have no idea what's going to come out of it. And to be on the other, to walk with them through that and see them on the other side is such a beautiful thing, and gives me hope on how to be able to show up better in my own relationships, whether they're intimate relationships or whether they're familiar relationships. Betrayal trauma, essentially, it doesn't discriminate against any relationship. So being able to see how people can put aside their pride, put aside their flaws, and really show up to be healthier versions of themselves for one another motivates me and inspires me to continue to do my own personal work, but also pursue this professional work that I've been privy to be a part of, specifically with this population.
Oh, that's a very passionate response. I love it. I love hearing about it, Kendra. And I guess my final question is, what words of wisdom do you have for our listeners, for people who are going through it and for partners who are watching it from the sidelines?
Yeah, so words of inspiration and motivation and encouragement for individuals and for the audience who is happen to listen to this episode. Give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. Give yourself grace. But also give your partner grace too. Because there is a level of understanding that has to be implemented for each other. Not just for one person, but for each other. Y'all are both two people. Y'all are not perfect, right? We're perfecting our imperfections, and we don't know what someone has gone through prior to us crossing paths and getting together, right? So really being able to understand each other from a deeper perspective, understanding how they were raised, what experiences they had in relationships, what were their traumas, what were their struggles, what were the things that they learned, really being committed to the person as opposed to getting caught up in the action of how they hurt you, because we're humans. We're going to hurt each other all the time. Get rid of the expectations that you're always going to be treated with kindness and respect, and it's always going to go your way in relationships. That's not reality. However, when you come from a place of, okay, I know my partner isn't perfect, and I know they have probably gone through things that they haven't felt comfortable with sharing, I can be able to hold space for them. I can be able to listen. I can be able to show a level of empathy and understanding, and be able to walk with them through this, as long as they're also reciprocating those actions for me. So those are the words of wisdom and the advice that I would give to those listeners.
I love that. What a beautiful way to end the podcast. So motivating. Thank you so much, Kendra. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Ruby. It was such a joy speaking with you.
Thank you for joining us. Please like, share, and follow our social media so we can always get the message out there that you are not alone. Until next time, bye.
There is healing, there is healing. Let your voices be heard.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.